The wagon wheel hit a patch of hidden ice beneath the fresh powder of a brutal Montana winter. Colt reacted with the instincts of a man who had spent a decade living by the gun, his body tensing before the crack even registered in his ears. But reflexes that could outdraw a bandit couldn't stop gravity. Everything slowed down. Supplies slid, his 3 sons cried out, and the world tilted violently. Colt's shoulder slammed into the frozen ground hard enough to steal his breath, pain exploding white-hot through his left side. When he looked up, 3 small faces stared down at him from the capsized wagon bed, backlit by the dying afternoon light. Snow was already collecting on their eyelashes, their breath hanging visible in the frigid air. "Pa!" Wyatt's voice cracked. He was 10, trying to be brave, but failing. The boy's hands gripped the wagon edge so tight his knuckles were white. Colt pushed himself up. His shoulder screamed in protest. He had wrenched it badly, maybe cracked something. He ignored it, forcing himself to stand. The wagon lay on its side, one wheel spinning uselessly against the grey sky. The axle was snapped clean through, split wood and bent iron beyond any quick repair. "Everyone out." "Careful now," Colt commanded, his voice rough. They climbed down one by one. Wyatt first, then Jem, then Toby. At 5 years old, Toby looked like he might cry, but he held it back. They were a gunslinger's sons, they knew better than to panic. Colt walked around the wreckage, calculating. 15 miles to the nearest settlement. The temperature was dropping fast, and the blizzard that had been threatening since noon was finally here, swallowing the landscape in white. "Can you fix it?" Jem asked. 7 years old, he still believed his father could fix anything. Colt looked at the broken axle, then at his sons. They were shivering. He had taken this Christmas Eve supply run to avoid the empty house back at the ranch, to escape the memories of Sarah in every corner. It had been 18 months since she died, 18 months of Colt barely holding it together, burning meals, and watching his boys become quieter versions of themselves. Now, his cowardice in running from the memories might kill them. "We can't stay with the wagon," Colt said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "We walk." "Where?" Wyatt asked, his eyes too old for his age. "We find shelter. Hold hands. Don't let go for anything." They walked into the white darkness. The wind cut through their coats like knives. Colt took Toby's hand with his good arm, shielding the boy from the worst of the gale. Each step was a battle. Snow drifted knee-deep. Colt's injured shoulder throbbed with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat, but pain was an old friend. He could handle pain. What he couldn't handle was the terror that he had led his sons to their deaths. They had been walking for an hour when Toby pointed a mitten-clad hand into the void. "Pa, look." Colt squinted. A faint light, soft and golden, flickered in the distance. It could have been a trick of the eyes, but they had no other choice. "Keep moving," Colt ordered. A homestead materialized from the storm, small but sturdy. Smoke rose from the chimney. Colt raised his fist to knock, but the door opened before he could strike wood. A woman stood there, backlit by firelight. She was young, perhaps 25, and even in his dazed state, Colt noticed she was unlike anyone he had seen in this territory. She wore a light-colored, traditional cheongsam that shimmered softly in the firelight, wrapped in a heavy red shawl against the draft. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her eyes were sharp, assessing the injury and the children in a single glance. "Get in," she said. Her voice was calm but commanded authority. "Quickly." She ushered them inside, blocking the wind with her body before slamming the door. The warmth hit Colt like a physical wall. The cabin smelled of herbs, sage, ginger, and something floral. "By the fire," she instructed. She moved with fluid grace, wrapping the boys in heavy wool quilts she pulled from her chest. She stirred the fire to a roar and set a kettle on the stove. Every movement was economical. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Sit," she told Colt, pointing to a chair. "That shoulder needs tending." "We don't mean to intrude." "We just need to warm up," Colt said, his pride trying to surface. You are not intruding, you are freezing. Sit. Cold Saturday. The woman brought warm water and a clean cloth. She rolled up his sleeve, her fingers cool and professional against his skin. She traced the line of his shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the old bullet scar on his bicep and the knife mark on his forearm. She didn't flinch, didn't ask questions. She simply assessed the new injury. Nothing broken, she said. Badly wrenched. I have a poultice that will help with the swelling. I'm Colt, he managed to say. These are my boys. Wyatt, Jem, and Toby. I am she replied, applying a paste that smelled of earth and mint to his shoulder. Drink this. She handed him a cup of tea that tasted strong and bitter but spread heat through his chest. By the fire, the boys were thawing out. Toby whispered something to Jem, and Mai turned, her expression softening. Are you hungry? She asked them. Yes, Wyatt said politely. Mai moved to the stove. Colt watched her, dizzy with relief. The cabin was spare but beautiful. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters, and on the windowsill sat a row of small, intricately carved wooden birds. It was a place of peace, a stark contrast to the violence of the storm outside and the chaos inside Colt's head. Mai served a stew that was simple but rich, seasoned with spices Colt couldn't name. The boys ate like wolves. Colt realized with a pang of guilt how long it had been since they had eaten a meal prepared with actual care. Thank you, Colt said. This is. You didn't have to. It is the law of the frontier, Mai said softly. When the storm comes, we open the door. My husband. He always said that kindness is the only shield against the cold. Your husband? Colt asked, glancing around the room. He died 2 years ago, Mai said, her gaze drifting to the window. A mining accident. I stayed. This is our home. After supper, the storm raged on, making travel impossible. Mai insisted they stay. She gave the boys her bed, a large mattress filled with feathers, and took a bedroll near the fire. Colt sat in the armchair, watching over them. Can you tell us a story? Toby asked from the bed, sleep already pulling at him. Mai sat on the edge of the mattress. She didn't tell a story of cowboys or bandits. She spoke of dragons and mountains in the mist, her voice melodic and soothing. Colt watched his son's eyes droop, the tension leaving their small bodies. For the first time in 18 months, the shadow of grief seemed to lift from them. Colt lay awake long after the singing stopped, listening to the wind scream. He looked at Mai, sleeping quietly by the hearth. She was a woman surviving alone, just as he was. But where he had hardened, she had cultivated warmth. It terrified him. Morning brought a clear sky and a blinding sun. The storm had broken. Colt stood at the window, drinking the coffee Mai had prepared. He knew he should leave. He had to get back to the ranch, to the livestock, to the life he was barely maintaining. Staying felt dangerous. It felt like hoping. The axle needs a smith, Colt said, turning to Mai. I'll walk to town, get help. The snow is too deep for walking that far, Mai said. Wait. My neighbor, Hank, he checks on me after storms. He will pass by. She was right. An hour later, a rider appeared, Hank, an old friend of Colt's. He saw the wagon and rode straight to the cabin. Colt? Thought you were a goner when I saw that wreck, Hank said, dismounting. He tipped his hat to Mai. Morning, Mai. Hank, she nodded. I can rig a sled to drag the wagon to town, Hank offered. But it'll take a few hours. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere shifted. The boys sensed the departure. Do we have to go? Toby asked, holding one of the wooden birds Mai had carved. Mai was showing me how to sand the wood. We have a home, Toby, Colt said, his voice sharper than he intended. Mai has her own life. We can't impose. You are not imposing, Mai said quietly. Colt looked at her. Her eyes held an invitation he wasn't brave enough to accept. He was a man with blood on his hands and a ghost in his heart. He couldn't drag this gentle woman into his mess. "We're leaving," Colt said firmly. The goodbye was awkward. "My packed food for them." She handed Toby the wooden bird he had been holding. "Keep it," she said. "So you remember that winter does not last forever." Toby hugged her around the waist, burying his face in her cheongsam. "Thank you, Mama," he whispered. The name hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Colt saw Mai's eyes fill with tears. She hugged the boy back, fierce and tight, then stepped away. "Safe travels, Colt," she said. "Thank you, Mai. For everything." They rode away in the rigged wagon. Colt didn't look back. He stared at the road ahead, his jaw set. Behind him, his sons were silent. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the world. The weeks that followed were a descent into misery. The ranch house felt colder than before. The silence was louder. Colt went back to burning meals and working himself into exhaustion to avoid thinking. But the boys had changed. They weren't just quiet anymore, they were angry. Wyatt stopped doing his chores. Jem stopped speaking entirely. And Toby cried himself to sleep every night, clutching the wooden bird. 3 weeks after Christmas, the boiler broke. Colt was under the sink, wrestling with a wrench and cursing, when Wyatt walked into the kitchen. "We need to go back," the boy said. Colt didn't look up. "Hand me the pliers." "Did you hear me? We need to go back to Mai. She's not our family, Wyatt. She was a stranger who helped us. That's it. She treated us better in 2 days than you have in 2 years." Wyatt shouted. Colt slammed the wrench down and stood up, towering over his son. "You watch your mouth." "No. Mama is dead, Pa. But we aren't. Why do we have to act like we're dead too?" Wyatt was crying now, angry, hot tears. "Mai made us feel alive. She made you smile. I saw it. Why are you so scared?" Colt stared at his son, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. He wasn't protecting them from disappointment, he was protecting himself from loss. He was a coward. That night, a bitter freeze set in. Colt woke up at 3 a.m. to a silence that felt wrong. He climbed the ladder to the loft. Wyatt and Jem were asleep. Toby's bed was empty. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Colt's chest. He ran downstairs. The back door was unlatched, swinging slightly in the wind. Fresh snow had fallen, dusting the floor. Colt grabbed his coat and his lantern, rushing out into the night. "Toby!" He found small footprints leading west. West toward the pass. West toward Mai's cabin, 15 miles away. Colt saddled his horse with trembling hands. The temperature was 20 below zero. A 5-year-old wouldn't last 2 hours. He rode hard, tracking the small prints by the light of the moon. The tracks were determined at first, a straight line. But after a mile, they began to weave. Then, he saw where Toby had fallen, the snow disturbed. 3 miles out, the track stopped near a cluster of scrub pine. Colt leaped from his horse. A small lump lay half buried in a drift. Colt dug him out, his heart hammering against his ribs. Toby was curled in a ball, his skin pale, his lips blue. He wasn't shivering. That was the worst sign. "Toby, no." "No, no, no." Colt ripped off his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped the boy in it, pulling him against his chest to share body heat. "Stay with me, son." Toby's eyelids fluttered. His voice was a whisper, barely there. "I've got you. I've got you." "I had to go," Toby slurred. "Mai. She's all alone. She's sad, Pa. Like us." Colt let out a sob that tore from his throat. His son had walked into a freezer to save a woman he barely knew from loneliness. Because he knew, with the wisdom of a child, that they belonged together. Colt rode to Hank's ranch, which was closer than his own. Hank and his wife worked on Toby for hours, rubbing warmth back into his limbs, feeding him warm broth. Colt sat by the fire, holding Toby's hand, weeping shamelessly. By dawn, Toby was stable. He was sleeping peacefully, color returning to his cheeks. Hank stood by the fireplace, pouring coffee. "That boy has more grit than most men I know." "He almost died because of me," Colt said, staring into the flames. "Because I was too stubborn to admit I was wrong." "So fix it," Hank said. "You're a gunslinger, aren't you? You spent your life fighting bad men. Maybe it's time you fought for something good." Colt looked at Toby, then at the window where the sun was rising over the snow-covered plains. "Yeah. It is." He took Toby home once the boy was strong enough. He gathered Wyatt and Jem in the kitchen. "Boys," Colt said, standing tall. "I've been a fool. I thought honoring your mother meant being miserable. I thought loving someone new meant forgetting her. I was wrong." Wyatt looked up, hope sparking in his eyes. "We're going back," Colt said. "All of us. And we aren't just visiting. I'm going to ask Ma if she'll have us. If she'll let me court her properly. But only if you boys are okay with that." "Yes!" Jem shouted, breaking his silence. "We have to go now," Toby said, jumping off his chair. "Before she gets lonely again." They loaded the wagon. Colt dressed in his only suit, a charcoal grey set he hadn't worn since Sarah's funeral. He strapped his gun belt on, not to use, but because it was part of who he was, and he was done hiding. The ride to the cabin felt shorter this time. The smoke rising from Mai's chimney looked like a signal fire. When they pulled up, Mai was outside, chopping wood. She stopped mid-swing, the axe resting in the block. She wore the same heavy coat, but underneath, Colt caught a glimpse of the red shawl. Colt jumped down and told the boys to wait. He walked toward her, the snow crunching under his boots. "Colt." She looked tired. Her eyes were rimmed with red, as if she hadn't slept well. "Mai," he said, stopping a few feet away. "I made a mistake." She tightened her grip on the axe handle. "You left?" "I ran away," he corrected. "I was scared. I'm a man with a past, Mai. I've done things I'm not proud of. I have 3 boys and a broken heart, and I didn't think I had anything to offer a woman like you. And now? Now I know that the only thing worse than being scared is being without you. My son walked 3 miles in the snow last night because he thought you were lonely. He nearly died trying to get back to you." Mai dropped the axe. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Toby? He's fine. He's in the wagon." But he was right. "We belong here. If you'll have us." Colt took a step closer, removing his hat. "I'm asking for a chance, Mai. To court you. To prove to you that I can be the man you deserve. I can't promise it'll be easy. I'm stubborn and I can't cook worth a damn. But I will love you every day I have left." Mai looked at him, then passed him to the wagon where 3 anxious faces were pressed against the cold air. "You are a fool, Colt," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes, and you are late. I expected you back 3 days ago." A smile broke through her tears. Colt let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a month. He closed the distance and took her hands. They were cold and rough from work, and they fit perfectly in his. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "If you don't, I might use the axe," she teased. He kissed her. It wasn't a desperate kiss of survival like the night of the blizzard. It was a promise. A beginning. The boys cheered from the wagon, tumbling out into the snow. They ran to Mai, nearly knocking her over. She laughed, the sound ringing clear and bright in the winter air, hugging them all at once. "Mama Mai!" Toby yelled. "We came home." "Yes," she said, looking over their heads at Colt. "You did." The courtship was the talk of the territory. Colt Brennan, the retired gunslinger, riding out every Sunday with flowers for the Chinese widow. He fixed her axle, then her roof, then built a new barn. She taught him how to use herbs for his aching joints and how to cook without burning the house down. It wasn't always smooth. There were looks in town, whispers about a white man and a Chinese woman. But Colt wore his gun low on his hip when they went into town, and his glare dared anyone to say a word. No one did. Mai taught the boys about her culture. She made them red envelopes for the Lunar New Year, filling them with coins. She taught them to respect their ancestors, including Sarah. She insisted Sarah's picture stay on the mantel, right next to the carving of the birds. Love does not subtract, she told Wyatt one night when he asked if it was okay to love her. It multiplies. Spring turned to summer, and summer to autumn. On a crisp evening in November, Colt took Mai to the hill overlooking the valley. He got down on one knee. Mai, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and a mother to these wild boys? Yes, she said. 1,000 times, yes. They were married on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the blizzard. The ceremony was in the cabin, crowded with Hank, his wife, and the boys. Toby stood as the ring bearer, holding the bands on a small pillow. He took his job very seriously. When the vows were spoken and the feast began, the cabin was filled with laughter and warmth. It was no longer a shelter from the storm, it was a fortress of joy. Later that night, after the guests had left and the boys were asleep in the loft, Colt and Mai sat by the fire. The snow was falling gently outside, a peaceful white blanket. Mai took Colt's hand and placed it on her stomach. Colt froze. He looked at her, his eyes wide. A spring baby, she whispered. Another dragon for our family. Colt pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. He thought about the man he had been a year ago, broken, freezing, and lost. And he thought about the man he was now. Thank you, he whispered. For the light in the window. Thank you, she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. For coming back. The wind howled outside, but inside, the fire burned steady and bright. The gunslinger had hung up his iron, not for fear, but for love. And in the heart of the winter, they had found a summer that would never end.